Hi, are you ready to take interlocking crochet to the next level? How about working with nets of triangles? This project is provided in collaboration with the amazing Kate Dedman. She took this interlocking snowflake pattern that's worked on squares, and she figured out how to work it in triangles to create this hexagonal snowflake pattern. So if you'd like to work with nets of triangles as well, be sure to download the free pattern. The link is in the description below, and let's get started.
All right, let's start out looking at the chart for the snowflake. You can see that there are two layers of triangles here. There's the blue triangles. Those represent the background color, and there are pink triangles, and those represent the design color. So as you're looking at the chart, you'll see that the pink design color always intersects in the center of a downward pointing background triangle, and the blue background triangles always intersect in the center of the pink design triangles. Okay, as we are looking at the individual stitches, a triangle mesh stitch is represented by a pink triangle. The top of the stitch is the top of an upward pointing triangle. So on the pattern, they can be represented in several ways. A solid triangle means that both legs, the right leg and the left leg, are both worked in front. A solid triangle with an F. A solid triangle with the B means both legs are worked in back. Or they could be represented by a forward slash and a backslash. So in this case, the first leg would be worked in the front and the second leg would be worked in the back, or the first leg could be worked in the back and the second leg worked in the front. So there's also floating stitches that we can add to each of the triangle mesh stitches. So there is always the two legs of the triangle included in every stitch, but there can be up to there could be 3 floating stitches also attached. So you could have 5 parts to one triangle mesh stitch. So you could have a right and a left floating stitch, and also a vertical floating stitch that comes down from the center. So those all would be joined at the top to create one triangle mesh stitch. So I'm going to show you how to set up to start out on the snowflake and set up the triangle mesh, and also how to do all of the stitches to create the floating stitches and the triangle mesh stitches, and how to work around them. Okay, we're going to start off with the main color foundation in row 1. So this represents the chain for the main color or background color, and then the top, this blue line right here, that represents the top of the row. And you can see there is upward and downward pointing triangles in the entire row. Okay, so the first foundation in row 1 for the main color, I'm going to start with a chain of 39, which I have my chain here, and we're going to be working in the back ridge of the chain, so it's these back bumps right here. I think you don't have to do that, but I think it's a little bit easier to see. So we're going to start in the 6th chain from the hook. So we're going to start in that chain, so this back ridge right here. So a triangle mesh is made by a double crochet 2 together with a chain 2 space between the 2 sides. So we're going to yarn over, insert the hook in the back ridge, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then yarn over and pull through 2. That's the first leg. So we're going to skip 2 chain, yarn over, and insert the hook in the next chain. So yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and then complete the double crochet 2 together, and you can see we have a triangle. So there's always a chain 2 between each triangle mesh, and that creates the top of the downward pointing triangle. So, and the next triangle mesh will always start in the same stitch that the last leg of your previous one ended in. So I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to insert my hook in that same chain, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2. I'm going to skip 2 chain and then pull up a loop in the next chain. Yarn over, pull through 2, and then yarn over and pull through all of them. So now we have 2 triangle mesh stitches that are upward pointing, and then you can see there's a downward pointing triangle between them. Okay, so I'm going to chain 2 before my next one, then I'm going to insert my hook in that same chain, pull up a loop, go through 2, I'm going to skip 2 chain and pull up a loop in the next one. Yarn over, go through 2, and then go through all of them. Chain 2, pull up a loop in that same chain, go through 2, skip 2 chain, pull up a loop in the next one. Okay, so we're going to continue across until we're hitting that last chain. Okay, I'm at the end of the row. I've done my triangle mesh stitches all the way across, ending in my last chain. So now I'm going to chain 2 and do my outside stitch, which will go into that same last chain that I finished this triangle mesh. So an outside stitch is a double crochet, so I'm just going to work that in that last chain. And on increasing rows, you always do a chain 5 at the end of the row. And that counts as the outside stitch for the next row plus the chain 2 that goes between the mesh stitches. So add my stitch marker. And you can see across the whole row I have 11 upward pointing triangles and 12 downward pointing triangles. That first chain worked as the outside stitch plus a chain 2. I have all my triangle mesh stitches, a chain 2, and then my other outside stitch. Okay, so now we're going to do the setup for the design layer. This is the foundation for the design color, and then that's the top of the row. So you can see that the chain is going to be in front, and the inside stitches will both be in the front, and all the rest of the stitches will be in the back because they're the lighter line instead of not the bold. The bold line represents the stitches that are on the right side of the design. Okay, so the design layer also starts out with 39 chains, so I've done those. I'm going to mark the 6th chain from the hook. Okay, and that one is going to line up over the first downward pointing triangle, which is this first space right here. And then the chain is going to go across on the front, and the last chain will line up with the last downward pointing window. Okay, so the design layer always intersects in the middle of a downward pointing window. So I'm going to do my yarn over for the beginning of my mesh stitch. I'm going to go back through that first downward pointing triangle. I'm going to pull the back ridge of that chain to the back, that marked chain. yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and go through 2. That's the first leg of my mesh stitch. Yarn over, go to my next triangle, downward pointing triangle, and then we need to skip 2 chain, pick up that next chain, pull it to the back, pull up a loop, yarn over and go through 2, and yarn over and go through the rest. So there's my first triangle mesh. I need to chain 2, so we always chain 2 in between each triangle mesh. So I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to pick up that same chain where we ended the last one. So pick up a loop, yarn over and go through 2, yarn over, go through that next downward pointing triangle, going to skip 2 chain and pull the next one through to the back. Pull up a loop, yarn over and go through 2, yarn over and go through the rest. Chain 2, yarn over, go into that same chain and pull up a loop, yarn over and go through 2 loops. Then yarn over, go into the next mesh window there, skip 2 chain, pull the next chain through to the back. Pull up a loop, go through 2, and then go through all. So you can see it's creating the line along the bottom, and the outside stitch or the inside stitch on the front, and then those are on the back. So let's do another one. Chain 2, yarn over, go into that same stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over and go through 2, go into the next downward pointing triangle, skip 2 chain, and pick up that next chain and pull it to the back. Pick up a loop, yarn over and go through 2, yarn over and go through all. So you're going to continue that across to the last chain. Okay, I've gone all the way across with my triangle mesh stitches. I'm going to chain 2, and then the last stitch on the row is an inside front stitch. So in that last chain, I'm going to be working in front. And then chain 5 because this is still an increasing row. So working nets of triangles is very similar to working a typical interlocking filet crochet project. When you're working stitches in the front, those are always the stitches that are facing towards you, and working in the back are always the stitches facing away from you. You always work 2 rows in one direction with each color, and then turn it and work 2 rows in the next direction. So that is always the same for either type of interlocking project. So now I'm going to turn it over, and we will start with row 2. All right, for row 2, we want to move the contrasting color to the back of the work. So that is to the back. Then we have an outside stitch. That is our chain 5, and then that's our next chain 2 before the triangle mesh. So that counts as our outside stitch. And then we're going to do 12 triangle mesh stitches that with both legs in the back. Okay. So as you're looking at this, the main color is already in the back, so we're not needing to pull it through the window for this row. So the first mesh stitch is going to end up in that outside stitch. So that one we will have to pull to the back. So we're going to yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2. Okay, yarn over, we're going to skip those 2 chain and then insert the hook in the top of the next triangle mesh stitch and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, and yarn over and pull through all. So that creates that first one. We're going to chain 2, yarn over, we're going to pull up a loop in that same stitch that the last triangle mesh was finished in, yarn over and go through 2, yarn over, and then we're going to insert our hook in the next triangle mesh stitch and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, and then through all. So there's 2. I'm going to chain 2, do my next triangle mesh, so you're going to go all the way across until you have 12 back triangle mesh stitches. Okay, I've done 11 of the triangle mesh stitches, and I'm at the end. I'm ready for my 12th one, so I'm going to chain 2. I'm going to yarn over and insert the hook in that same mesh stitch, yarn over and pull through 2, and then we're going to skip 2 and go in the next chain, which is the top of the outside stitch. So pick up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through all, and chain 2, and then we have to do the outside stitch, so we want to pull that so that you can get to that stitch so it's on the outside. So we're going to go into that same stitch that we just finished the triangle mesh and do a double crochet, and that's our outside stitch. Then we're going to chain 5, and put in our stitch marker. Okay, now for the contrasting row, we have an inside back stitch. So our turning chain counted as our inside back plus our chain 2. So our next stitch is both legs of the triangle mesh will be in front. So the first leg is going to go into that inside front, or the inside stitch. So yarn over, insert the hook in that inside stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2. The second leg is going to go in the top of the first triangle mesh, so we're going to pull up a loop in there, yarn over, pull through 2, and then pull through all, and chain 2. So there is our triangle in the front. Next, we need to do a triangle with the first leg in the back and the second leg in the front. So yarn over, we're going to go through that downward pointing window, pull the top of that same stitch we finished in to the back, pull up a loop, go through 2. That was the back leg. I'm going to yarn over. Now in the front, we're going to go through the top of the next mesh stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over and go through 2, and then yarn over and go through all. So that is a triangle mesh that's a back and a front. So I'm going to chain 2. So you can see that it made a design line on the right side of the work. Next, we are going to do 3 triangles that are all in the front. So I have my chain 2, yarn over, start in that same stitch and pick up a loop, yarn over, go through 2, yarn over, pick up a loop in the next triangle mesh, yarn over, go through 2, and then yarn over and go through all. That's 1. Start in the same one, and the next one. Chain 2, start in the same, then end in the next one, and chain 2. There's 3 front stitches. Then I have the next one will be a front and then a back. So the first leg is in the front, yarn over, gonna pick up that same stitch, yarn over, go through 2, yarn over, the next leg is, we're gonna insert the hook through that downward pointing triangle, pull the top of that next stitch to the back, pick up a loop, yarn over, go through 2, and then go through all. Chain 2. The next one is a back and a front. So the first leg is in the back. We're going to yarn over. From the back, we're going to pick up that same stitch. Oops. The second leg is in the front, so we're going to pick up the top of that next triangle mesh, pull through 2, and then complete the stitch. Chain 2. And then the next part, we're going to do 3 more triangle mesh in the front. There's 1, chain 2, here's the second one, chain 2, and the third one. And chain 2. So the next one is a triangle mesh that's a front and then a back. So yarn over, in the front we're going to pick up that same stitch, and then we're going to go through that downward pointing window and pull the next stitch to the back, pick up a loop, go through 2, and complete the mesh stitch. Chain 2. And the last one is another front stitch. So yarn over, gonna go through the front to that in that same stitch. And then we're gonna skip our 2 chain and go in the top of the inside stitch. Then a chain 2, and then an inside back. So that's a double crochet. We want to pull that same stitch we worked into to the back and do a double crochet. Chain 5. And then we'll turn the work and be ready for row 3. So you can see that it made a little design on the front here, a little V shape here, and then another angle here. And that is the same part. You'll see that's this part of the design, this V right here, and this part. For row 3, we want to move the contrasting color to the front. Then we have an outside stitch, which is my chain 5, so that's my outside stitch plus a chain 2. And as you can see on the instructions, these are all mesh stitches that are in the front. The reason that they're divided up like this is to show where they fit into the design. So the first 2 will go over here, The next 4 will go between those. The single one goes in the middle here, and then there's 4 and then 2. Okay, so my first 2 are in the front. The first one is going to start in that outside stitch, so I'm going to pull that to the front, pick up my loop, go through 2, and then in the next stitch to complete my mesh stitch. Chain 2. The next one starts in that same stitch. I'm going to pull the top of that next stitch over to the side. Pick up my loop, go through 2, and then finish the stitch. Chain 2. So that's the first 2 front triangle meshes on this side of that design element. Now I'm going to put 4 on this side. So I'm going to pull the top of that stitch back over to this side, pick up my loop, pull through 2, and then go in the next one. That's 1. Here's my second. Chain 2, my third, chain 2, and the 4th. And pull that to this side, and my chain 2. Okay, now there's going to be a single front stitch that's going to be here. So I want to get to the top of that mesh stitch and pull it to the front. And pick up my loop, go through 2, and then get the top of that next mesh stitch and pull it up into there. So now there's a triangle mesh in the middle. And you can see how the design always is intersecting in the middle of a downward pointing triangle. So I'm going to chain 2. So I'm going to have 4 front mesh stitches over on this side. So I want to pull the top of that last one over to this side, pick up my loop, go through 2, and then go in the next one and finish my stitch. There's 1. 2, 3, and 4. So get the top of that stitch over on this side, chain 2, and then my last 2 front stitches will be on this side of that design. So my yarn over, I need to get that stitch pulled back over to this side. Chain 2, and then my last mesh stitch will be the same as that one and in the top of the outside stitch. So I'm going to skip those 2 chain, go in the top of my outside stitch. Chain 2. Now I want to pull that to the outside. And do my outside stitch. And chain 5. Okay, for row 3, I have my inside front, which is this chain 5. There's inside front plus chain 2, and then I'm going to do 3 triangle mesh in the back. So I'm going to pull that inside stitch to the back, pick up a loop, go through 2, then yarn over, go into the next mesh stitch and pick up a loop, go through 2 and finish the mesh. There's 1. Okay, chain 2. So back in that same stitch, pick up a loop, and then the next stitch. Chain 2. Here's my third one. Okay, so the next part of the design, the stitches that are within the bracket, they all combine to form one triangle mesh stitch. So this is a right floating stitch. The first leg of the mesh is in the back. There is a downward floating stitch, and then the second leg of the mesh stitch is also in the back. And all of those 4 parts combine to make one triangle mesh. As you're looking at the design, so this is row 3 right here, you can see this is the right floating stitch, this is the first leg in the back, this is the vertical floating stitch, and then this is the second leg also in the back. Okay, so also we have the subscript numbers. So the 1 refers to one mesh stitch over to the right. So I'm gonna have my yarn over. So normally your stitch is going to start in this one right here, but we're going to do the floating stitch in the next one to the right. So instead of this one, we're going to start over here. So what we want to do, so also all of the floating stitches are double trebles, so they have 3 yarn overs. So in the front, and also the floating stitches are all on the right side of the work. So since I am working on the right side, all of the stitches will be in the front for this row. So this is where it would normally start. So I'm going to pull this stitch, 1 stitch to the right, up to the front. So I want to grab the top of that stitch and pull it to the front, pick up a loop. Then I'm going to yarn over and go through 2 3 times. So that is the beginning of my floating stitch. Okay, the next part of that stitch is the triangle mesh in the back. So that's 1 yarn over. We're going to pick up in that same stitch where the triangle mesh starts. Pick up a loop, go through 2. We're going to still leave all of those loops on the hook. Okay, the next part is a vertical, and the 2 means to go down 2. So I'm going to do my 3 yarn overs. So this is where the stitch lines up for this stitch. So 1 row would be here, 2 rows down would be here. So my 3 yarn overs, I need to go into that downward pointing window and pick up the top of that stitch. Pull up a loop, yarn over, and go through 2 3 times. So that creates my vertical floating stitch. The last part of it is a back for the last leg of the mesh. So my yarn over, and then the next mesh stitch is right here. So we're going to pick up a loop, go through 2, and that is now all 4 parts of that triangle mesh. So I'm going to yarn over and go through all to complete that stitch, and then chain 2. Okay, the next one, there's 3 parts to this stitch. So we have the first leg of the triangle mesh is in the back. There is a vertical stitch down 2 and the next leg is in the back. So the first leg of the triangle mesh is in the back, so that's going to go into that same stitch that this triangle mesh finished in. So pick up a loop, go through 2. The next part is the vertical, so I'm going to yarn over 3. So we are centered right here, so that's 1 and 2 into that downward pointing window. I'm going to pick up the top of that stitch and pull it to the front. So yarn over and pull up a loop, then go through 2 3 times. And then the last leg of the mesh is in the back, so yarn over. So that was the first leg, here's the next leg. So I have all 3 parts on the hook. That's all 3 for that mesh stitch, so I'm going to yarn over and close that stitch, chain 2. Okay, the next one is a triangle mesh with the first leg in the back and the second leg in the front. So pick up the first one in the back, and then this one is in the front. Chain 2. Then I'm going to do one with both legs in the back. So I'm going to pull that top of that same stitch to the back, and then the next stitch here. Okay, there's a triangle mesh in the back, chain 2. Then I have the next triangle mesh is a front and then a back leg. So 1 yarn over for the front leg. I'm going to pull that stitch to the front, and then go in the next stitch in the back, and chain 2. Then we have another one that has 3 parts. The first leg of the triangle mesh is in the back. There's a vertical floating stitch down 2 rows, and then the last leg of the triangle mesh is also in the back. So yarn over, go into that same mesh stitch, pick up a loop. The floating stitch has 3 yarn overs. So we're going to go straight down 2 rows and pick up the top of that stitch and pull it to the front. Go through 2 loops 3 times. Oops. And then the last leg is in the back, so the next triangle mesh stitch is there. Yarn over and close that group. The next one has 4 parts. The first leg of the mesh stitch is in the back. There's a vertical downward 2 rows. There's a second leg of the mesh stitch is in the back, and then there's a floating left stitch. So I'm going to do my chain 2. Okay, the first leg is in the back, so let's pick up that same stitch. My vertical down, I need my 3 yarn overs. I'm going to go straight down 2 rows into that downward pointing triangle, pick up the top of that stitch, go through 2 3 times. Now the second leg of the mesh stitch is in the back, so go into the next mesh stitch, and then we're going to do a left floating stitch. So the left, we're going to go 1 over from the last leg of the mesh stitch we're working on. So that is this next stitch here. So I'm going to yarn over 3 times, pull the top of that next stitch to the front, pick up my loop, then yarn over and go through 3 times. And then yarn over and close that stitch and chain 2. So it's important to remember when you're doing one of these left floating stitches, the mesh stitch is actually finished over here. So this is where you're going to start the next mesh stitch. If you start over here, you're going to miss a stitch. So you always want to make sure that you have a mesh stitch over in as part of every stitch. So the next part is doing 3 back stitches. So I have my chain 2. So the last leg of my triangle mesh was right here. So I want to go into that same stitch to pick up my loop. And then the next leg is going to end in the same one that this left leg ended in. So pick up a loop. So there's my first one. Okay, my last one, and skip 2 chain and go in the top of my inside stitch. Chain 2, and then I'm going to end with an inside front. So I need to go into the top of that same stitch and pull it to the front. Chain 5. So you can see what we have here is we've done this, we've done those 2 stitches, this downward one, here, and here. For row 4, before I turn it over, I'll show you where the stitches are going to go. The stitches are divided up as 4 back stitches, 2 singles, 2 together, 2 more singles, and then 4. So they're going to fit in, the 4 will fit in that section. There'll be 2 singles, the 2 will fit in the middle, 2 more singles, and then the last 4 will go at the end. So let me turn it over. I want to make sure my contrasting color is to the back. So I'm going to start out going in the back into that outside stitch. And then the next one. Chain 2. There's 2. Chain 2, and I got to fit 1 more in there, so I need to pull it way over to get to the top of that next stitch. So back in the same one, and then into that next stitch. And you can see that it's fitting in there. Okay, now I have 2 singles, so I'm going to pull the top of that same stitch back over to this side. And my chain 2. And you can see that the design color is ending up in the center of a downward pointing triangle. So that would be the correct window. So 1 more single, Gonna pull that stitch back over to this side. Then I have 2 that are going to go in here. So pull that same stitch back over to this section. Chain 2 and 1 more. So I'm going to get the top of the next stitch over. Chain 2. Going to do 2 more singles. And then I got to get 4 more in this last section. It's going to be on the other side of both of those floating stitches. So I got to pull that way over to get to that same stitch I ended in. There's 1. Okay, chain 2. And the last one. It's going to end on top of that outside stitch. Chain 2. And then my chain 5. So, and you can see when you turn it over, all of the floating stitches are ending up in the downward pointing windows, and nothing is separated or anything, so it's all looking good. For the contrasting color, I have my inside back plus the chain 2. And then I'm going to start with 2 front triangle mesh stitches. Chain 2, and there's my second one, and chain 2. The next stitch has 4 parts. There's a right floating stitch. The first leg of the triangle is in the front. There's a downward vertical floating stitch, and then the last leg is also in the front. So do my 3 yarn overs. Normally my stitch would start here, so I'm going to be pulling this stitch to the back. Since I'm working on the wrong side, all of my floating stitches have to be pulled to the back so they'll be on the right side. So I'm going to go through that downward pointing window and pull this stitch to the back. Okay, the next part is the front, so back into the same place that mesh stitch ended. Then a down, so 3 more yarn overs. It's going to go straight down and meet this stitch right here. Okay, and then the last leg is also in the front. So I have all 4 on there. I'm going to close that stitch and chain 2. The next part is I have 8 front stitches. is 1, 2, 3, 4, there's my 6th one, there's 7, one more, and 8. Okay, then the next stitch I have to do is 4 parts. The first leg is in the front, there's a vertical downward 2 rows, the next leg is in the front, and then there's a left floating stitch. So I'm going to start off in the front so it's in the same place that mesh stitch ended. There's my first leg, 3 yarn overs. I'm going to go down, straight down into this stitch right here. So I'm going to pick up, pull that stitch to the back. Then the next leg is in the front. And then I have the floating stitch, so 3 more yarn overs. The triangle mesh ends here, so the next one to the left is there. So I'm going to pull that one to the back through that downward pointing window. And close that stitch. Chain 2. Okay, the next part is 2 more front stitches. And since my actual mesh stitch ended here, this is where I got to start the next one. There's 1. And 2. And chain 2. And then an inside back. So let's pull that inside stitch to the back. Okay, now we're ready for row 5. We want to make sure our contrasting color is to the front. And this one is broken up into, there's 3 front triangle mesh in this section. There's 9 that will fit here, and then 3 that will fit on this side. So my outside stitch, I'm going to start the first triangle mesh in the outside stitch. Oops. There's 1. 2. Then we got to pull it over so we can get to that last one. Okay, now we need to fit 9 front stitches over in here. So we got to pull the top of that stitch back over. There's 1. 2. That's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Pull the top of that same stitch back over to this side. I'm going to get on the side of both of those floating stitches there. There we go. And then I have 3 more. Okay, that's my last back stitch, chain 2, and my outside stitch. Now we're ready for the contrasting color. We have my inside front plus the chain 2. I'm going to do 2 back mesh stitches. So starting in that inside stitch. There's 1. And 2. Okay, the next group is a right floating stitch combined with a back triangle mesh. So we'll yarn over 3 times. Normally I would start here, so to go 1 to the right, I'm going to start there. So I need to pull that through the downward pointing window there. Sometimes they're a little difficult to get to. So yarn over and through 2, 3 times. And then the back stitch. So that's the first leg of the triangle mesh, so that's going to go in that same stitch. And then the next leg is also in the back. And then close that stitch, chain 2. Okay, now I'm going to do 1 more mesh in the back. Chain 2. The next one is a right floating stitch, the first part of the triangle mesh in the back, a vertical floating stitch, and then the last part of the mesh in the back. So yarn over 3 times. So I'm going to go 1 to the right of this stitch, so I'm going to pull the top of that stitch to the front. Then it was the back, so yarn over once, go into the same stitch that that mesh stitch ended in, and then a vertical floating, chain 3 yarn overs. That one's going straight down. It's going to go into the top of this stitch right here. and then the last leg is in the back. So it is right here. And then close that stitch. The next one is the first leg of the mesh stitches in the back. There's a vertical floating stitch 2 rows down, and then the last step of the triangle mesh is also in the back. And we're going to do that stitch 5 times. So I need to chain 2. Gonna go into the back into that same stitch, yarn over 3 times, pick up the top of this stitch, then yarn over and go through 2-3 times, yarn over once, and then go into the next mesh stitch and close the stitch. Chain 2. There's 1. So back, down, and back. There's 2, back, down, and back. Back, down, and back. And one more. Okay. The next section is a back for the first leg of the triangle, down 2 rows for a floating stitch, back, second leg of the triangle, and then a floating left stitch. So there is the back, down, and then back, and the left. So 3 yarn overs. This is the end of the triangle mesh, so the left is going to be in that one, so I got to pull that to the front here. And close the stitch. Then I have a back stitch. Okay, so the last leg of my mesh stitch was over here, so I want to make sure I'm starting over here. And chain 2. And then I need a back stitch combined with another floating left. So that goes into this stitch over here through this downward pointing window. And chain 2. And then I need 2 more back stitches. So I got to go back over to where that mesh stitch ended chain 2, and then end in that inside stitch. And an inside front. So pull that back to the front, and double crochet, and then chain 5. Okay, for row 6, I need to turn it over. I want my contrasting color to be in the back. So you can see I have 3 that are going to fit in here, 2 that are going to fit in here. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 individual ones, another 2, and then my last 3. Okay, so I'm going to start with 3 in the back. So start with my outside stitch. There's 1, 2, and 3. Gonna get that pulled over. Okay, 2 of them are going to go in the next section, so I had to get that same stitch pulled back. And then I have 6 single ones. There's 1. The second one. That's my third one. There's 4. Five and 6. Okay, I have 2 in this next section, so I got to pull that back over to this side. Sometimes it feels like you're pulling it really far. And then the next one goes on this side. I have 3 that need to fit on that side. and my outside stitch. Now for the contrasting color, have my inside back plus my chain 2. Gonna do 4 triangle mesh in the front. Get over to that inside stitch. There's 1. Okay, next I have a right floating stitch combined with a front. So that's 3 yarn overs. I normally would be starting here, so I'm going to start there instead. And since I'm on the wrong side, I need to pull the stitch to the back. So I need to get that stitch pulled to the back. And then a front stitch combined with that. Okay, next I have a back for the first leg and a front for the second leg. So we're going to go through that window, pull that to the back, and then a front, chain 2, then a front stitch, another back, and then a front, and then a front, then followed by a back, so the front, and then the back, another front, a front followed by a back. So the first leg is in the front, the second is in the back. And then a front combined with a left floating stitch. So there's my front. 3 yarn overs for the left one. That's going to go 1 stitch to the left, so I'm going to pull that to the back. And then I have 4 front stitches. So my actual mesh stitch ended here, so that's where I'm going to start the next one. That's 2. 3, and my last one. And my inside back. Okay, for row 7, I am going to put my contrasting color to the front. I'm going to do 1 front stitch. I'll start by picking up that outside stitch. Okay, and the reason this back stitch is underlined is just to help identify a part of the design. It's going to be where it creates a horizontal line in the design. So I'm going to do 2 back stitches that are going to create that line. Okay, so I'm going to do my yarn over. We're going to go back through from the back to the front in that downward parting window, pull the top of that stitch to the back, yarn over and go through 2. Then yarn over, you're going to go back through that same window and pick up the next mesh stitch and pull it to the back. So that's the mesh stitch completed. I'm going to chain 2. So it made a vertical line on the front. I'm sorry, a horizontal line on the front. So there's 2 of those. So I'm going to go back through this next downward pointing triangle. I'm going to pick up the top of that same mesh stitch and pull it to the back. Okay, then go back through that same window and pull the next mesh stitch through. And chain 2. Then I have 2 more front stitches that are going to fit in this section here. So I'm going to go in that same stitch I just finished in for my next mesh stitch. And then I'm going to pull the top of that next mesh stitch over here. Then I have a single one. It's going to fit right here. So pull that same one back. Then I have 2 that are going to fit here. A single one that's going to fit here. Then another 2. Then a single one. And then 2, got to get that back over to that side of the floating stitch. Okay, so now I'm here. I'm going to have another 2 back stitches that are going to create my horizontal line. So I'm going to come back through this window here and pull that top of that stitch to the back. Then back through the same window and pull the next stitch to the back. Okay, now I'm going to go in the next window, pull that same stitch to the back, go in the same window and pull the next stitch to the back. And then I have one more front stitch. And my outside stitch. So that gives you a good idea of how to do all of the floating stitches, the left floating stitch, the right floating stitch, the vertical floating stitch, how to get the horizontal lines, and how to work the background around those floating stitches. So I will meet you after row 11. That's when the design is going to start to decrease.